Tonight, we are actually pausing our James series for a bit. James often alludes to or references back to the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gave, one of his most famous sermons. And so in preparing for James, I'm often drawn back to the Sermon on the Mount. And I was reading the end of the Sermon on the Mount this week, and I hit this little story, parable, metaphor that I needed to hear again this week. And it spoke to me so much more deeply than the passage of James that we had been working on. So for better or for worse, I'm going to share what resonated with me rather than our scheduled James passage. It's summer, it's July, I can do what I want. So I want to begin by saying all carpenters start out stupid. It's a heck of a way to just kick things off, right? And if you're a carpenter here tonight, please take no offense in that. I'm not picking on carpenters. This is true for everything, right? When you're first learning any skill or trade or just about anything, you're not good at it. You make choices you shouldn't, you get things wrong, you fail. And you learn. And after enough failures and enough learning, you hopefully become a smart carpenter who can build things that are strong and stand the test of time. We talked about this a few weeks ago. When you need a carpenter, you look for one that has experience, one that knows what they're doing. When you're renovating a house, unless you're incredibly adventurous and brave, you don't hire a new first-time carpenter. Why? Because you want your renovation to be done well, on time, on or under budget, but mostly you don't want to worry about your house falling down, right? A few years ago, Michaela and I, mostly Michaela, really wanted to redo or renovate one of the bathrooms in our old house, taking an old shower out and installing a bathtub. Our house had no bathtub, and Daisy at that point was getting too big to fit in our sink. She was still a baby at this time. We were not trying to fit current-sized Daisy into a sink. And on top of that, Michaela's happy place at the end of a long day is in a warm bath. So ripping out that shower and replacing it with a tub was a total non-brainer for us. It was a tiny bathroom, and Michaela somehow found a tub that fit like exactly those dimensions. So I couldn't say no. I'm a pretty handy guy. I can fix just about anything. I grew up around power tools, fixing and building things with my dad. And now with YouTube, you can learn how to do just about anything, which is wonderful and terrible. But even with all that, I am smart enough to know I am not a plumber. I don't mess with that stuff. I'm not a tiler. I don't know if that's the right word for someone who installs tile, but I am such a perfectionist that many lines to get perfectly straight would drive me absolutely insane. So I didn't want to become a plumber. I didn't want to become a tiler for this project. So we knew that we were going to hire some people out to actually install the tub and the tile around it. But this meant that demo and replacing the walls was up to me. Now, demo is the easy part, right? I mean, it wasn't easy. It was really messy and really difficult. And I don't know if you've ever chipped tile off of walls before, but the adhesive used to stick tiles on walls smells really weird when you break it off. I had never really smelled it before that, and still to this day, every once in a while, I just get like a whiff of it. It's like not great. Anyway, as you know, when demoing, for the most part, you're just breaking stuff. And I'm good at breaking stuff, especially when it's intentional. So that was fine. I can smash stuff off of a wall. I can pull down drywall. It's the rebuilding where I get intimidated. So I got that shower ripped out and the walls stripped down to the studs. The plumbers came in and rerouted some of the pipes. They installed the tub, which was fantastic. After which, one of them pulled me aside to show me how far down I needed to put the backer board on the wall that would come down to meet the tub. And I nodded like I knew what he was talking about, and then I gathered enough courage to ask, now when you're saying backer board, you mean drywall, right? And he laughed, because clearly I was joking. I mean, who in their right mind would install drywall in a tub area behind tile, right? I wasn't joking. Because I had never renovated a bathroom before, and I wasn't 100% sure what backer board was, and drywall, believe it or not, is what I removed from behind the walls, behind that shower. So, for those of you who are like me, backer board is like drywall, but it's made of this kind of cement-like composite that's waterproof, which is an important thing. You put it behind tile in places like showers and tubs and whatnot, because drywall ain't proof. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of discovering that. It's not a great time. So whoever originally built our bathroom is either a jerk or maybe just a carpenter who was still stupid, which is how we all start out. Anyway, once the plumber could tell that I wasn't joking, he explained all of that to me with now zero confidence that I had any idea what he was talking about, which was super fun. And the plumber also told me I need to build a little wall in front of the tub to, secure it in place. To which I said, yeah, duh. I got the wall thing, man. I didn't, but I knew that some kind of wall probably needed to be there, otherwise it's just going to look weird, but I didn't know how I was going to do that. So the tub's installed, the plumbers leave after making a couple more drywall jokes at my expense, and I do a bunch of research on backerboard and how to cut it and install it, and I go to the store, I buy a bunch of this backerboard stuff, and I also get a scoring tool, because that's what people on the internet said I should use to cut it. A scoring tool is basically this weird little knife thing with a spike on either side of the end, which you can see here. It's so medieval looking, right? Like this is not advanced technology. And so you take that spike and you scrape along the backerboard where you want it to cut, kind of like you would score glass, but this is not glass. You score it over and over and over again, and then you can, in theory, break it along that line, which sounds easy enough, right? It's not easy. It's not. It's cement. It's crumbly cement, but it doesn't score super easily, and then it doesn't break super easily. It just kind of breaks wherever it wants to and falls apart. And I spent hours trying to get this right. And I kept making weird cuts that didn't fit the measurements I need. It was very, very, very frustrating. Eventually, I had my friend come over to help me build that tiny wall that I pretended to know about. And he's an incredible carpenter. And he helped me build that tiny wall in like 20 minutes. It would have taken me all day. And it took him, because I would measure everything 5,000 times, it took him 20 minutes because he's an incredibly smart and skilled carpenter. Anyway, I think he could tell that I was struggling with the backerboard because he could see the destruction. And he asked how I was cutting it, and I showed him that thing. And he took one look at it and said, I want you to go outside, and I want you to throw that as far as you possibly can because it's worthless, and it'll only make you angry. Let me go get you what you should use. And he ran home, and he returned with a grinder, which is a tool I didn't know existed. But it sounds as cool as it is. It's basically like a power slicer cutter thing. It's like a wheel that spins really fast that cuts stuff. And I know you're thinking you're just talking about a saw, but it's not a saw. You can go Google it if you're very interested. It's awesome. It's my favorite tool now. And he gave it to me, and it cut through this backerboard like butter. It was so satisfying, especially after using that stupid scoring tool. Suddenly, I made tons of cuts quickly and accurately, and the backerboard was up in a few hours. But if it weren't for my skilled carpenter friend, I'd probably still be trying to score that stuff with a blunt little scoring knife, bawling my eyes out, because I was a stupid carpenter. I'd never done it before, and I didn't know what I didn't know, like a smart carpenter does. A stupid carpenter uses the wrong or really inefficient and ineffective tools. A stupid carpenter puts drywall behind tile in a bathroom. A stupid carpenter builds their house on sand. And that is the exact metaphor that Jesus uses to close out his famous Sermon on the Mount, which you can find in Matthew 5-7. This idea of a smart carpenter versus a stupid carpenter. So let's look at what it says. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 7. We're going to start in verse 13 and go all the way to verse 27. I'm starting a little bit before the little parable that Jesus tells, because there's a few things that lead up to it that I want you to hear. Jesus says, don't look for shortcuts to God. The market is flooded with surefire, easygoing formulas for a successful life that can be practiced in your spare time. Don't fall for that stuff, even though crowds of people do. The way of life to God is vigorous and requires total attention. Be wary of false preachers who smile a lot, dripping with practiced sincerity. Chances are they are out to rip you off some way or other. Don't be impressed with charisma, look for character. Who preachers are is the main thing, not what they say. A genuine leader will never exploit your emotions or your pocketbook. These diseased trees with their bad apples are going to be chopped down and burned. Just real quickly, I have very mixed reaction to those verses. On the one hand, they're very affirming and vindicating to some of the past experiences with bad leaders I've had in my life. On the other hand, they make me very uncomfortable, which is a good thing, I think. Jesus' words like these should make every pastor at least a little uncomfortable. Luckily, charisma is not a quality I have ever been accused of possessing. So continuing on, knowing the correct password, Jesus continues, saying master, master, for instance, isn't going to get you anywhere with me. What is required is serious obedience, doing what my Father wills. I can see it now. At the final judgment, thousands strutting up to me and saying, Master, we preached the message. We bashed the demons. Our God-sponsored projects had everyone talking. And do you know what I'm going to say? You missed the boat. All you did was use me to make yourselves important. You don't impress me one bit. You're out of here. These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words, words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you are like a smart carpenter who builds his house on solid rock. Rain poured down and the river flooded. A tornado hit, but nothing moved that house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words and Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you're like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. So Jesus ends this quintessential sermon with a pretty clear choice to his listeners. We didn't read the entire sermon, we just read the very end, and he says, either apply these words to your entire lives or don't follow me at all. If you work Jesus' words in this Sermon on the Mount into your life, if you realize that God is for the outsiders and the outcasts, the people we would never assume he's for, the poor in spirit, the mourning, the meek, the not yet righteous, if you begin to see your purpose as being salt and light of the world, the means through which God wants to bless everyone around you, if you internalize the commandments and let them shape your heart and character rather than treating them like a checklist toward holiness, if you act in generous and loving ways, even to your enemies, if your pursuits are humility and grace and forgiveness and love for those around you, if you treat others the way that you want to be treated, then you are like a smart carpenter building their house on a firm foundation. And you will develop the inner character to withstand life's many storms. Even when you lose everything else, you will not lose your character, your heart, your spirit, your very self before God. But if you don't take Jesus' words seriously and actually embed them into your life, then you're like a stupid carpenter who builds their house on sand, which quickly crumbles when the storms come. If your life isn't built on a foundation of love and grace, you will not have the inner strength to weather the storms that will surely come. Basically, if you don't work Jesus' words into your hearts and minds and hands, then hearing them at all is utterly pointless and a waste of time and resources. That's the gist of what Jesus is saying. Either follow me with the entirety of your being or don't follow me at all. And if you get down to it, that's the underlying message that James is trying to reiterate in all of the passages that we've been looking at. Either do this thing or don't do it. There's no half-weighing it. But there's a few things that I want to point out here about this metaphor that I find life-giving. The first is that storms come to both carpenters' houses. Being a smart carpenter doesn't mean that you don't experience hardship. It doesn't mean that we don't experience suffering or tragedy and trials in our lives. But it does mean when those inevitable storms strike, though you may lose everything else, you will not lose yourself because you are grounded in the ground of all being. Everyone goes through storms. The difference is how you emerge from the storm after it subsides and the waters recede. The second thing I want to point out is what I started with. All carpenters start out stupid. You don't know how to build a house on a firm foundation of rock and not sand until your house is crashing down around you, or you watch someone else's house wash away in a flood. And you learn, and you rebuild your house with a better foundation. The past few years, when I've come across this passage, I can't help but wonder how many of us feel like our houses have crumbled these past few tumultuous years. Maybe the last few years have exposed a lot about yourself that you didn't know or weren't willing to acknowledge before. Maybe the storms have exposed how unanchored your inner life really is. Maybe the storms have revealed deep fault lines in your character. Maybe these storms have made it clear that you built your house on sand. None of us are smart carpenters automatically or by default. None of us are born wise. Mastery and wisdom and intelligence and maturity are all fostered through a lot of time, a lot of storms, and a lot of failure. And a lot of rebuilding over and over after the storms come and show us the weak points in what we've built. I don't like rebuilding. I don't like seeing my weak spots. I really don't like failure. In fact, like my deepest fear is failure. I feel an immense amount of shame in failing. In fact, much of the work of my life over the past 15 years has centered around learning to embrace failure as opportunity and to let go of any shame I may feel for not being a smart carpenter right away. The last few years have certainly revealed some cracks in my foundation, some new, some old, but it's been a tough first half of this decade. I'm sure you can relate. I know at least on some level you can, because that's also been true for our church. In our history, there have been lots of rebuilt foundations after decades of storms that destroyed our houses. Some outside of our control, some due to building faulty foundations around leaders that did not have the best character. And in this iteration of rebuilding, it feels like our foundation is firm, but we're in another season of rebuilding as our church. We are stripped down to the studs. Maybe you're in a similar season in your life as well. If you're looking around and your house is sitting in shambles, you have a choice. You can double down and rebuild the exact same way, or you can learn from the storm and build your house on a better foundation. You have an opportunity to use this to your advantage and take steps into greater depths of mastery and wisdom and spiritual maturity. Contrary to my fears, there's no shame in needing to rebuild. We all have to, because all carpenters start out stupid. Learn from your mistakes and learn from other carpenters you cross paths with. Trade that scoring knife for a power grinder. Trade that sand foundation for one of rock. Living a life that is truly founded on love, love for God, love for others, and love for self is a life embedded in the surest foundation that will withstand all the storms that come with life. But we have to learn how to build there, and that usually takes failure and rebuilding. I encourage you sometime this week to read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew 5-7. It's not long. Read it in its entirety sometime. If this was the only piece of scripture we had, just these 3 chapters, it would be enough. And if even half of us who claim to follow Jesus actually built our lives around what Jesus teaches there, the world would be a far better place. And heaven would be a bit closer to colliding with earth. So, in this transitory time that is where we're at as a church, but also just the calendar, it's the middle of summer, the middle of July, it's time to go check your foundation. What is your house built on? Maybe it's time for a rebuild. Would you pray with me? God, may we find the strength and courage to grow into smart carpenters who build houses grounded in you, the ground of all being. May we open ourselves and allow Jesus' words to embed into our hearts and our minds and our hands. And may we live lives marked by radical love and grace for you and each other and ourselves. God, thank you for this community. Thank you for what you are building here again. God, thank you that you don't give up on us, even when we keep building faulty foundations. Thank you that you are right there to help us pick up the pieces and to learn and to rebuild. God, I pray, whether it's this church or in our individual lives or both, that you would help us see that you are there with us to pick up the pieces and to rebuild and to live our lives for you with the entirety of our being. We love you, God. Amen.